And I saw New Zealand's marching across the world. People are marching for, what happened to, Mr. Floyd in this instance. So that makes my heart, I mean, I love that. I mean, it just makes you feel that people are paying attention now. And I almost feel like this is kind of like a new civil rights movement with the marches and everything going on in this era right now in 2020.
And you as a lawyer, this is one thing I was really looking forward to visiting with you about. And hopefully we won't lose too many people talking about the subtlety of this. But you said the phrase "a new civil rights movement," and I think that's an apt phrase because it immediately recalls, the old civil rights movement, which is where the law had to change, right? I mean, so we had the end of the Civil War and slavery, and we had the passage of those constitutional, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment and all that. And then we had a world of segregation. And finally, in the 60s, we get Title VII and the federal announcement that from here on out, the law at least is going to treat everyone equal, regardless of race, national origin, color, gender, religion, the whole list there. And so we now have the legislature, the lawmaking body of the country has spoken, and most states have, of course, also followed through and passed their own non-discrimination laws that basically proclaim, okay, we recognize now there is equality in the law. Having said that, as we all know, it hasn't worked out exactly the way we would like to see that in the executive branches, in the judicial branches. We have crazy criminal sentence disparity. We have executive orders or lack of enforcement of laws against whites, but enforcing them rigorously against African Americans. We have still this huge disparity. And so my instinct as a lawyer is to say, okay, so where do we apply those civil rights concepts when the law has been quote unquote fixed, and now we're like dealing with two completely different branches of government?
So I mean, so your question is like, how do we apply it, or what should we do next with the law, or?
Sort of. It's more of the idea of saying, okay, in the previous civil rights movement, the push was the law itself did not recognize what it ought to have recognized. There had not been a final completion, going all the way back to the original federal Constitution and its 3/5 clause, right? We finally get in the 60s an actual declaration that under the law, race isn't supposed to matter anymore, period. Right? That to me was the seminal accomplishment of the previous civil rights movement, was the actual change in the law that had to happen to even begin laying a foundation for true racial equality in the country. So now that that's happened, calling this a new civil rights movement feels like the right term. I'm just trying to figure out what it needs to be aimed at to accomplish, whatever the next phase of this needs to be. That's really my question, because passing a new non-discrimination law isn't the answer. We have that. It's what we do with it now.
Okay. Yeah. So if I was the person in charge, I can pass new laws. And in this era, so in the 60s, they passed all these, anti-discrimination laws. I think right now, people are protesting because of police brutality. So a law they could pass is having body cameras on police officers. If every sworn officer, and officers do a great job out here, and they're protecting the community, and they're serving, us. But there's some bad ones, as you see, like in Minnesota, who are putting their knees on people's necks. And this happens a lot. We just don't know about it because it's hidden. Now with cell phones, evidence, this is coming to the light. But this has been going on for years in history. So I think a law would be to have police and law enforcement with body cameras. I would do that. I would have an independent investigation on all police shootings or all police brutality. I know it might cost money to do that, but if they had a true independence, I think the community would trust that process. Right now, the community is like, okay, if an officer, gets in trouble, right now, another agency that's next door, neighbor, investigates them, or maybe they're investigated internally. So it's a cop investigating another cop. I mean, they might do a fair job, but a lot of people in the community feel like, well, how does another officer investigate another officer when they're buddies? So I think changing the law by having body cameras to be required as the law, and by having independent investigator investigate all police shootings, so that way the public and the community will feel transparency and feel that this is a true and fair justice system.
So on that same vein, and you mentioned George Floyd here, what is the white community missing about that scenario? What all, again, I'll say my perspective again as the middle-aged white guy here. I see what happened was horrific. I'm thrilled that the officer that did it has been arrested and charged with murder. I understand that the county attorney up there has been taken off the case, and the state attorney general is coming in by special appointment to handle the prosecution, so that there won't be that too little separation between who's calling the shots there. And that they're considering charges against the 3 other officers there who sat around and did nothing. So I hear all that as an attorney, and I think, okay, that's great. That's exactly the kind of stuff that needs to be happening. And then my white brain goes, so why are we still mad about it? That's my instinctive reaction to the continued protest. If the guy was still walking around, the cop was still walking around out there, to me, that's like, oh, well, I can understand that. But it's taken on a larger meaning, and I feel like I'm missing part of that larger meaning because I don't see it.
So no, that's an excellent point, and I've seen that people say that, like, why are people still upset? Why are people still protesting? The officer's been charged. But I think this is not about George Floyd. It's a big thing, but I think it's a bigger issue than this. I think people are saying, this is George Floyd, we're marching for him, but we're not only marching for him, we're marching for people like Tamir Rice, who was shot by a police officer, Freddie Gray in Baltimore, who was shot by a police officer, Michael Brown, and all other people throughout this nation who've been shot. So I think right now, George Floyd is taking the mantle and they're running with it. But I think people, as you see across the nation, across the world, are just tired of police brutality and want things done. And this is a perfect opportunity right now to keep going. And I think some people were upset that, yes, he was charged, but if I were to go out there right now and put my knee on somebody's neck, Josh, I would be arrested instantly. And kill somebody.
Yeah.
There'd be no investigation. They would come, put me in handcuffs, and take me down to the jail. People were upset that it's on video, and it took them so long to arrest this officer. So it's like, why did it take almost a week to arrest the officer, and now the other officers are being investigated, but people want these other officers arrested and put behind bars. So I think the community and the public who are marching are kind of like, why is it taking so long? And I think some people are like, oh, you do the investigation, but it's like, it's on video, it's on camera. And I think people are like, what is taking so long and to do the process? And we as attorneys, we understand the rights to due process. But the public doesn't understand, because we don't get due process as a community when we do something wrong. We just get thrown behind jail, behind bars. So I think that's why people are protesting, not just for George Floyd, but for all the other police brutalities. And people are just tired of it. Seeing these images all the time of African Americans getting killed by officers who are unarmed and not even a threat. And people are just tired. I think this movement right now is built up from over years and years and centuries of police brutality and nothing being done about it.
Yeah, and the in hearing that, do you think there's also an element of wanting to sustain the attention long enough to make sure that these officers aren't just arrested and charged, but there's actual justice imposed for what they've done?
Exactly. A lot of times these things happen. You see in the media for maybe a week, and then it goes away, and you never hear about the case again until the officer gets convicted or the officer gets off by the grand jury or a not guilty verdict or whatsoever. But now I think people are like, no, we're going to be in here for a long time. We're going to be protesting. And I'm just curious myself at how long this is going to happen. But I personally like it. Every night people are protesting, even with this curfew now throughout the nation. I think people are going to still protest and still keep it going, because people want to be heard.
I completely agree with that. My favorite recent quote on that, I think at least it was attributed to Will Smith. I didn't hear him say it, but it was the idea, that racism, racial disparity, none of that's new. It's just now being filmed. And so the body cam idea, I think, is tremendous. And thank goodness we had some video from Minnesota, or who knows what would have happened in that situation. So there are really two other questions that I wanted to ask you, and one is more external and one's internal. For people who genuinely want to learn and find out just from a data standpoint the stuff that they've been missing because we didn't grow up in a mixed race environment, or we just whatever reason didn't get that part of our training completed yet. Where do you go? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to get a true in-depth perspective on the racial divide that we face as a country?
I think, there's many books out there, and I don't want to just choose just one, but I think anybody would to Google African American history, it's history books. I think people need to realize the history that we learn in school, you might just learn it in February for Black History Month or just the Civil Rights Movement. There's many different elements of history where there's, African Americans have contributed to this country as scientists, lawyers, doctors. And I think people just need to educate themselves and just understand, what's going on in the African American community. So I think that's what it is. We kind of are all in our little silos, and we don't understand, what's going on in somebody else's, backyard in their neighborhood. So I think I would ask, any other race who's not understanding, the history and the anger of what's going on, just read any African American book. Just Google it, and just read anything about African American history and going back so you can understand the struggle of the civil rights movement, of slavery. And this is not something that, this has happened overnight. This is something that's been going over generations and generations and hundreds of years. So this learn the history of what has happened, and then understand why are we here today. I just think about Rodney King. I think Rodney King was one of the first police brutality cases on video, and the LA, riots, were going. And there's been other ones too, but I think the public really saw Rodney King because that was on video right there. And they saw a man get beat up by all these officers in Los Angeles. So I think that was one of the first times that people kind of woke up. In the African American community, we've always known about police brutality.
Right.
Growing up, like you asked me the question earlier about, how different things you learn. Yeah, when an officer comes, we always learn, hands at 10 and 2, and don't move. And when you want to reach for the glove department and get your license, say, officer, I'm reaching for my wallet. I'm reaching for my insurance. And you'll pretty much tell. And myself as an attorney, I teach young African Americans those know your rights and what to say and what not to say. So that way, officer doesn't just think you have a weapon and you actually get shot. And that's what happens a lot of times in these histories of these cases, that sometimes the officer might, think a cell phone is a weapon and gets scared and fear for their life and shoot. So yes, I would, suggest right now, any person that's not African American to just read the history books and post about, Black Lives Matter, post about, being as one. Because myself personally, I'm sure other African Americans do, we like it that people are now waking up and understanding the struggle and getting involved. And this is one America. So it's not just African Americans, whites, blacks, Hispanics, we're one America here. So we have to live as one. And I think if we understand and respect one another, we can all get along, as a human race.
Yeah. Yeah.